liquefied natural gas, LNG. Hot topic, no pun intended, because of the great pause for the cognoscenti who follow this issue at all. They know this administration has paused permits. You've got a great report out on why LNG exports matter, but let's just start out with the political topic du jour that's relevant to the long term. Did the pause matter? I mean, did it make any difference that we just paused giving permits for American companies to export natural gas, build facilities to export natural gas? Did it matter?
Well, I think that was part of the nefariousness of it, is it just depends from where you're sitting whether it affected anything. From the perspective of a project that has been fully permitted and is already under construction or has completed construction and is exporting, then the pause doesn't matter at all. It's not like they retroactively went back in time and took away permits or something. So the U.S. is still either the world's top LNG exporter or probably the second. But based on the data from last year, we were the top exporter in the world. So that story is continuing to play out with the U.S. as a major player in LNG markets. If you were a project that is pending, then it does matter a lot because the pause freezes your application at the Department of Energy. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is in charge of permitting your actual facility, and so that continues. It depends on who you are and where you're sitting, but I think for somebody who cares about the future of American energy, the future of the U.S. government's relationship with its people, for the separation of powers, for the regulatory state, for all these big questions, it does matter a lot that this pause came down and that there is seemingly nothing you can do about it until next year.
Well, so let's talk about who cares. Let's imagine you're a country somewhere in Europe, you're South Korea, you're Taiwan, you're Japan, and you're a massive importer of energy resources, and you want to plan for the future because when it comes to energy, long-term planning matters. So for them, too, this is very consequential because it makes it hard to plan where you're going to get energy, who you're going to count on and contract with. And it's not an option, it's a must-have.
I think that's absolutely the case. I think because the LNG market is so relatively new in terms of its global stature, it's been around for 60 years, but only in the past decade or so has it really sort of taken off with the entry of the U.S. into the competition. I think because the LNG market is relatively less well known than the crude oil market, people may have a misconception for how easy it is to turn LNG on and off. When it comes to oil, we have roughly 100 million barrels per day are being produced. Lots and lots of different countries can produce it. Lots and lots of countries export it. You don't need to do anything to the crude oil to make it ready for shipment other than some light treatment, perhaps. But oil does not have to be refined in order to be exported. Doesn't have to be frozen or heated or anything like that. And so it's a very, very liquid, no pun intended, market.
And it's your point, Tristan. There's lots of suppliers feeding into a huge demand. This has a handful of suppliers, right, feeding into a huge and growing demand. And the wild card here is that on the margin, and I think your report shows this, right, the marginal new sources of energy for the next decade, it's not oil that has the most growth, and it's not wind and solar in terms of absolute quantities of energy that will have the most growth. It's LNG.
That's right. And LNG takes 20-year, 30-year contracts in order to lock in because you want to be able to finance the project. I think it's important for people to understand that these are massive engineering feats where you have to liquefy something that is a gas. That is not a super simple exercise. And then you have, and it's very expensive. And then you need to have both ends of the equation. You need to have the liquefaction and the regasification. Again, for crude oil, you can ship crude oil almost anywhere you want. But LNG has to have some place to go. And that takes time and money. And when you have games being played with the regulations, when you have applications being turned on or turned off, or studies being commissioned, reviewed, then that just adds to the risk of any one particular project making it to the final finish line.
Of course, the point you made, which is lost on people who aren't familiar with this market, is that LNG as a trade of global energy is relatively new, last decade roughly, and is joining the oil market in importance in terms of global exchange of energy for economic growth and survival. But it was made possible not by the discovery that one could find an expensive way to turn a gas into a cold liquid. It essentially created by the advent of what I'm going to call shale technology, shale tech, this astonishing increase in gas production from the United States, producing such cheap gas, offsets the high cost of turning that gas into a liquid to get it overseas. This is I think, your report has the title. I think this is an important point to get across to policymakers and policy influencers. This is a genuine generational opportunity for the United States to capture one of the biggest new growth markets for geopolitics, for economic export, for stability of the world's energy markets. I mean, it's crazy how big the opportunity is and how I would think inappropriately, I'll use that delicate word, we're playing with the long-term planning for this.
Yeah, I think you were right. The LNG market is totally different today than it was 10 years ago when I first started working on the policy side of this question 10, 12 years ago or so. The
That makes you an old man, Tristan. You know that, right?
Alaska had the first U.S. LNG export facility, but it was pretty tiny, and it's been turned off for economic reasons. But it started operating in the 1960s, and if you look at the size of the facility, the volumes that can be exported from it, in theory, compared to the size of the facilities that are being constructed today, it's just no comparison. These are massive facilities that we're building today, and it is absolutely a generational endeavor, not just in terms of the exports, but in terms of the production and in terms of being able to use natural gas domestically, which is also something that I think policymakers should not forget. That exports are not the only thing you can do with gas, and if there are ways of using it to make value-added products at home, that is something to I think prioritize as well. We have seen domestic industrial consumption of natural gas increase, but not at the same pace as exports. And I think that is an important question for the policymaking community to ask: is there something that is holding U.S. industry back from using more natural gas than it would otherwise? Regulations. Are there state level laws? I have no idea, and nobody has really looked at that question in great detail.
Well, you make a very important point about it, and it's already the case in oil markets. It's true in a lot of commodity markets that there's both global and domestic demand, and because no policymaker, no bureaucrat, no regulator is smart enough to know exactly how to arbitrage and balance domestic global needs, how pricing and growth rates shift, having access to both markets to allow the markets to function is extremely important. If you constrain one side of it, you distort, the whole industrial dynamic over which we can't have perfect vision. You want to have as little friction as possible in these markets. And you came out of the Senate and the Department of Energy and the National Security Council, so you've had experience inside the proverbial swamp to understand two things. And I want you to think about an answer to two questions. They're related. Is it feasible, not what you think, whether it could be done? So, second part, is it feasible to restore to or create for the LNG market, gas market, the kind of market-centric dynamism for exports of LNG that we have for other commodities, whether it's crude oil, refined oil, wheat, those kinds of commodities? Is it technically possible? Because we don't have that right now, given the pause potential. Is it possible? Could we reform the legislation in a way that would give the agencies both more independence, in some sense, more not totally independent to react to markets, but more importantly, less capricious ability to politically change their minds about whether we like exports or not? Is it technically possible from a legislative perspective? Can we do this?
Absolutely the case. We can relook at the laws that are almost 100 years old now, that govern natural gas import and export. The U.S. has also been importing LNG for a while, as you know. So the same kinds of laws apply to both imports and exports. But it's the export story has been really new. I think the feasibility in terms of whether or not you could write a bill that would accomplish something, absolutely. You can revise the Department of Energy's ability to act capriciously, as you've indicated, turning things on and off. Already, if you look at the existing regulations, there's a whole series of categories of natural gas exports that are treated differently than the ones that have been paused. For example, natural gas exports to Canada and Mexico, to free trade countries, FTA countries, those are approved automatically. Exports of a small scale size, thinking about it, container ship size exports to, say, the Caribbean or Latin America, where people use wood and dung to heat their homes and to cook, which is not great for human health. You can use natural gas instead of that. Those kinds of exports are also approved automatically. There are some de minimis levels of exports. Think about like science laboratory experiments. Those are also approved automatically. But it's these exports to non-free trade agreement countries that get all this extra scrutiny. There have been a number of efforts in Congress to expand those other categories that are approved automatically to include, say, members of NATO, Japan, India, potentially other U.S. allies and trading partners. There are a host of trade-related sticky wickets or questions that emerge for each of those different proposals, but they have been carefully considered for sure. I think that the other thing to think about is if you were to think about sort of full scale or wholesale revision, you might want to look at the relationship between FERC and the Department of Energy, and whether or not it makes sense to try to take the LNG export process in a less easily politicized direction.
I mean, I think this is sort of what the debate we're having now. The pause, by definition, is political. A president can issue an executive order or simply de facto instruct the administrative state to slow walk, because you can. I mean, it's hard to prove slow walking. You can always say, we had to study this more carefully. We were short-staffed. You didn't give me enough money for my staff, Congress. So maybe the last question or first question, depending on how we think about it, given the times we're in, is guessing prospects. I mean, this is a generational opportunity. It's new. We have 100-year-old laws applying to modern technology in our current geopolitical state. This is going to be a political issue. It already is. A lot will depend on the outcome of the election with respect to what happens, House, Senate, and the White House. So if you're guessing today, regardless of the political outcome, because a lot of people on both sides now care a lot about the geopolitics and the economics of this, what's your gut? What's our prospect for getting meaningful improvement in this great opportunity for export of an American product that generates so much both benefit for the United States and the rest of the world? What's your gut?
I think it's important to look at the exact details of what this administration did on LNG exports and its pause. What it did is say, we're not canceling these things. We're not going to reject them. We're just going to pause their consideration while we issue these studies. These studies will take a year. They'll be issued sometime in 2025, not coincidentally right after the election. This is exactly what happened during the Obama administration in their first term, where in 2011, they commissioned a number of studies. The studies were finally completed in 2012. They were the final study. There were actually two. The second and the most important one was completed in July of 2012. It was not released until later in 2012 after the election. And all of a sudden, then the department began to approve LNG exports again. So my gut is you're going to see something very similar play out. In the event of a Harris re-election, you will see the DOE issue its reports, resume approvals. They may have conditions on those approvals, which would be a new event in terms of this progression. Those might be mitigating requirements that the projects have to conduct carbon capture or something like that. And then the approvals would continue up until the point where they've reached the limit of the studies. and then the studies would then have to be resumed again. And this could coincidentally be at the time of a midterm or a 4-term election. So my gut is approvals resume with some kind of conditional requirements, or in the event of a Trump administration victory, you see a reprisal of what they did after Obama, which is to begin to make a very clear statement that all these things will be approved as long as the law is followed. In terms of legislation, it's very difficult to get anything through Congress these days. As you know, there are a number of different avenues. Each of them have their problems, but certainly I think there is greater interest on the part of the Democratic Party in LNG exports today than there has been in the past 10 years.
So Tristan, great report. I'm excited that it's coming out at a politically propitious time. People pay attention to it's a big issue. It's not just an energy issue. As you know from being inside the National Security Council, it's a non-trivial geopolitical issue.
Thanks, Mark, for supporting the report.